Okay, today's Wednesday, the 6th of May, and this is a 522-322 Zoom. Our third? Is it our third, folks? It's our second. Our second, thank you. Look, I want you to have your mics on, unless you've got massive noises off, like stray dogs or cats or little people or whatever. Welcome, Michael. So if you could keep them on, because I'm not going to be doing, I hope, a lot of the talking. I probably will. I can't help myself, but I want to make sure that you talk as well. So if you go to, I'm going to move you all over to my right and get up my PowerPoint. Here we go. Where have you, oh no, I've lost you. I've not done this before, give me a break. I'm getting there and I'm putting you there. No, I'm not. Paul, you're right in the screen, a massive shot of you. Looking very handsome this morning. There we go. I think I'm set. So, if you're on the Renovation of the Heart, Willard and Frousey, 2005. Before we get going there, I was having a read of Psalm 119 this morning. And I just wanted to share a verse with you. Verse 58. And I hadn't really thought about this, to be honest. I can't remember thinking about this before. And it says, this is in the Message version, David talking to God. He says, I beg you from the bottom of my heart, smile, be gracious to me, just as you promised. Now, I just laid out there, I'm talking to myself. Normally, I must confess, I'm going through life trusting God to smile on me and do what is gracious towards me, and believing that that's what he's going to do. And this verse basically puts it in the sense that I'm begging you, God, to do that because you've made a promise. There's a promise, and I'm begging you to fulfill your promise. In other words, I'm not in neutral, I'm actually in gear. I'm not being passive and what will be, will be. I'm actively leaning on God and saying, you know how Abraham wrestled with God. Well, I'm just wondering whether that's what the idea is, that it's not a case of you just let go and let God, which is a great phrase, I think. But why not lay hold of God and beg from the bottom of our heart, we want you to bless us. We want you to look after us and guard us and guide our path. Anyway, I believe it's a fantastic verse and it's said a lot to me today. And I trust that you are having a great walk as well. Okay, let me launch. If you go to page 2, now one of the things I would normally do is I would play these links in a classroom with you, and we would have a corporate time together and we would share the journey. But because of time, and obviously our Zooms are a lot shorter than having a whole day together, I don't think that's appropriate. And therefore, I would encourage you to, in your own time, work through these PowerPoints and obviously watch the links as you go through. But on page 2, can I just draw your attention to that title? Welcome to the greatest adventure of your life. If any of you would like to respond to that, do you believe that joining a course to train as a teacher for the rest of your life is the greatest adventure of your life?
It's part of the greatest adventure of my life.
Ah, it is the greatest adventure of your life.
Part of it.
Paul, you want to expand that? What do you mean?
Yeah, the greatest adventure of my life. Bit cliche, but it's obviously my faith journey / adventure. And it has been an adventure because I've encountered many things I never thought I would think or believe or see. And yet they happen. And the teacher's journey happens to be part of it as I start to discover more and more interesting facts about faith and its use in education.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this bit here on the PowerPoint is taking a metaphor out of a movie which I actually
The Matrix.
can't remember having watched. Matrix.
You gotta watch it.
I'm sure. Do you like that film?
Oh, it's amazing. I love it.
You do? Okay. Well, I mean, obviously, yeah, the word cliche comes to mind, but speaking from my own life, if I hadn't become a teacher, I was thinking of becoming a farmer.
You would have been bored.
Sorry again?
You would have been bored.
I don't know. It would have been an adventure, I'm sure. But the fact is that I went down the route of becoming a teacher in 1974 when I went to university to train. It just changed the whole direction. And what I'm mapping out for you is I feel for you because here you are in this journey that is going to completely, I do discount what Paul has said, it is going to completely change the direction of your life. Nothing can be the same again. Seriously. It's as if you're going into another universe. That's my position. You can think otherwise. I leave that to you to meditate upon. Heidi's face is a picture. Thank you.
There's a lot of things that, yeah.
It's a picture. If you could go to page 3. Now, this is definitely your turn to participate, please. When you're in a classroom and you're engaging with kids, whatever the age, I bet you that pretty much every day you'll be involved in some issue of injustice. It goes with the territory of dealing with people, in particular kids, who just say it as it is. Now, so therefore, if you're going to be, if you like, managing and negotiating people's issues with injustice, what about yours? So my question is, how do you respond to injustice? What is your mechanism? How do you do this? In particular, I've listed there exploitation of women, racial discrimination, employment discrimination, controlling personalities, abortion. Go for it. If you don't respond, I will pick on you.
Is this how do we respond in the classroom or just in our life?
In your life, Paul. How do you cope with the exploitation of women? What do you do with that?
Yeah. Well, the main one for me that I give that's really affects me the most would be the abortion issue, and in response to that, among other injustice issues, that I don't tend to put too much time into single issues per se, because I've come to see myself that it's really they're all connected to a very simple if dangerous concept of sin and infidelity. So what it really does, I do my best with respect to, say, wherever I am, making it known my position is, so people don't get a false idea, but also what we're in this specific path, working into the teaching career in order to raise the next generation of people to know those problems and to work and fight against them. What was I also going to say?
Good, Paul. You've done good.
That's it. Yeah.
Emily.
I actually find, for me, because of the church that I attend, I actually have a really great opportunity to contribute, particularly financially, to these issues. Because I attend a church that's very missions focused, and so we've got a lot of projects that happen all over the world. And I actually I've been to like Thailand and Cambodia, and I got to see firsthand like the red light district, and I think that really impacted me greatly, just to see the actual condition that women in particular are living in. And so for me, obviously I give financially to my church's projects, but I also pray, and I try to use, like, particularly my platform on social media, to kind of share what I know and what I've experienced, because there's a lot of people who don't realize the conditions that other people are living in throughout the world. So,
Emily, you've triggered something. My wife and I went to Thailand 10 years ago, no, whatever, 8 years ago. We were just flying back from England at the time, and we were popping in. I'd heard so much about Thailand, and I thought, well, why not have a few days in Thailand? And we were in a cafe restaurant one day, and I saw a local lady, sitting at a table with a male, probably 20 years older, who came from the north of England. And then I joined the dots, which I'd heard about but never seen. And for all of my life, ever since I remember being a teenager, there was an awareness of a culture that if you were really adventurous from the north of England, where I come from, then you go on a trip to Thailand, and there are women everywhere. And here I was witnessing this. Was she happy to be with him? What was the relationship? I couldn't work it out. It was life shattering for me to realize that this is how British people treat Thai women. And it just got into my being. Whereas if I'd kept my eyes shut and didn't see, I wouldn't feel as passionate, I guess, because I wouldn't know. So it's really weird. I sometimes walk around my community here and think, what is so much money spent on that car for, as it roars up the street? This is ridiculous. We're all living in a bubble. If only we could be aware of how the world lives and not be cocooned in ourselves, it would be such a better place. So that's a bit of a story of how I respond to injustice. And what, and we're talking about women here. My second daughter has really run with the whole notion of A21 and the anti-trafficking thing, which many of us will know about, I'm sure. But my feeling is that she wouldn't have run with it and the campaigning and the fundraising for that if she hadn't heard me talk about it as a teenager growing up. It's so I feel so blessed that there's somebody else taking on the torch, and it's not just me. And I want to pass that torch on. And that's why I'm doing this video.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I appreciated what you said, Paul, about making your position known. And make me cry too. Because I think I've been convicted about, Sorry.
Who's next? Come on.
About staying silent. About staying silent.
Absolutely.
And I used to work a lot during my hobby's been studying for years. And I used to work in high-end restaurants, and I saw a lot of what you described, Jim. People out for dinner and spending, a lot of money on it. And I often found it really hard to make my position known spiritually out of fear.
I think we can all learn from the example of Daniel. When King Darius outlawed all worship of anyone except himself for 30 days, the Israelites could have just easily said, oh, it's okay, we can all just pray privately as long as no one knows, it's fine. He could have just done that, and he would have technically been observing his subservience to Yahweh. Instead, he decided to open up his windows of his house and shout his prayers to the Lord. So he didn't just do what was technically and at a minimum required. He went above and beyond the call of duty for the sake of God's will. And what does that say for us here?
Good call, Paul. Anyway, on this page here, I just want a show of hands. How many of you know Keith Green?
No.
Two hands. I see two hands. Well, Keith Green was born in 53 and died in 82 in a plane crash. I absolutely encourage you to do some research on Keith Green, his life. His wife, Melody, wrote an amazing book called No Compromise after his death. And his life, I think, was a musician. And you may not like his music, but listen to some of his or read some of his stuff. You will find it in the light of what we've just been talking about. Really inspiring. I commend Keith to you. Now, a show of hands, please. Dietrich Bonhoeffer. A few more hands.
Heard of him, but haven't actually known any detail.
Well, let me just encourage you to obviously read this, but I personally haven't been able to access his deep theology. That's been not my job, but I have been highly inspired by his biography, and in particular, why I'm bringing him up now is the way he managed, and I'm not saying he was right or wrong, I'm just saying the way he managed ambiguity. When you can't, that's right and you can't do both. What do you do then? How do you manage those challenges? And the bottom line is, do you have a hand in an attempted murder of Hitler? Would you have had a hand in doing that if you had been there at the time and had the opportunity? Question. Short one-word answer.
No.
All right, just a show of hands. Who would have had a hand in blowing up Hitler if they could have? I see one hand.
I suspected this might come.
I don't know, and I'm so grateful I was never put in that situation. But I would be a conscientious objector. That's in my blood from my family. But I don't know. It's too hard.
Well,
Page 4.
Or you would have been shot. Well, either that or you would have been shot.
That's an option.
Page 4. People watching. Now, on page 4, I'm highlighting to you how observant you are of people, how excited or otherwise you might be to try and work out what does that body language mean, what does that look mean. I personally find people watching a great delight. and I never get bored. You know, if I'm sitting in an airport, for example, waiting for a plane, no, I'm not. But if I was, I would be fascinated to work out who's related to who and what's this and what's that. Anyway, the lead up for that comment on page 4 leads to the orange question. When you consider your life, what parts do you want to renovate? Have you tried before and failed? Now, there's a huge implication in that, namely that there is a need for renovation. And you might have a theology that says you have been renewed by the working of the Holy Spirit in your life, and therefore all is good, thank you, praise the Lord. Your theology might not go along those lines. It might be the opposite extreme, and you might be beating yourself up and never at peace because you are so cheesed off with the mistakes you make every single day. I'm painting ridiculous poles apart. But what about you folks? Have you considered your life, and what parts do you want to renovate? Have you tried before and failed? Michael, do unmute. We got to hear from you today with your hat on. That's it.
Hey, yep, I have. I think the last about 5 years has been a bit of a trying to find what works, or you know, because it's not just me. I'm trying to lead, you know, like a family. So, in response to your how we see injustice, like I had a little instance last week at Coles. Me and my daughter, who's 11, stopped outside Coles, and there was a security guard who's an islander like me, and he was getting racially abused. And I was walking in while this was happening, and having my daughter next to me kind of changed my response. And like with the watching, I sat in the car for about a minute watching what was going on before getting out, just to kind of, you know, gather my thoughts and, you know that whatever I say and do, like, you know, young minds can take in what I'm saying. So just had to keep in mind. And I think in past years, maybe 5 years ago, I would have approached it a lot differently, probably more aggressively. And I was going through some of the slides yesterday, and it was talking about, you know, seeing people as, if they're good or bad, as, you know, children of God. So first, before, you know, making judgments. And I don't know what that person was going through before they were making those comments, or, you know, they might have had a rough morning, or someone die, or those kind of things to consider. So I think that kind of changed my perspective on things.
And what did you say? What did you do?
Nothing really. I just asked the security guy if he was okay, and the manager came out, and she just kind of, who was European, so she ushered this customer away, and she kept yelling and stuff, but I think the best response was kind of no response, or just you know, just being polite, because there were a few people around. And yeah, so it's interesting. I think we're learning as we go, and I'm just hoping to pass that on to whoever follows.
Sure. What about any areas of your life that you want to renovate that you're prepared to share? Pass? Pass.
Yeah.
Anyone else want to come in there? No? Okay.
Yes, I will.
Okay, Paul.
Well, as you might have noticed through a few of my assignments, Jim, I still have a little bit of a procrastinating bone in my body. It's been whittled down a lot since I started university. It's still a bit there though, so I'm not sure if I say I would have failed to get rid of it, but I could be doing it so much faster. And I am a little bit closer to that end of the spectrum where I kind of beat myself up a little bit, because I have so many opportunities do everything I need to do, whether it be assignments or other necessities, other responsibilities in various areas and spheres of my life. And yet I don't take them up. I might just pull up YouTube. I might start gaming with a few of my friends. So there's a lot of wasted time right now, less than before by God's grace, but there's still a lot. And so I do, in my opinion, rightly beat myself up over it a little bit, because that beating up kind of it keeps me ensured that this is not an okay reality. This is not a reality I can be okay with, and something I need to
9:30.
push myself out of.
Well, thank you, Paul. That is very honest, and I really appreciate it. One of the second question there, have you tried before and failed? To me, that phrase there is hinting at, well, now, when we do this in this course, let's make sure we build achievable goals and essential supports so that we actually gain encouragement from success rather than repeated failure. So don't, go and bite off a whole elephant. Let's just go for an ear at a time, because otherwise it's going to be soul destroying and we're not going to get anywhere. So each of us has to, I am putting this idea up of renovation for a couple of reasons. One of them is another subject which you will do towards the end of, in fact, I don't think the bachelor do it, but the masters do, action research. And there, the whole notion is, what aspect of your teaching do you want to improve? So rather than having a negative attitude about things, see them as opportunities for growth. And so I'm trying to turn the narrative from beat up to possibilities, and be excited about, hey, life can be different after 2020.
That's a good thing.
Good.
I'm still stuck in here. We're still stuck inside, not allowed out. So
I know.
Things.
Page 5, some very expressive faces. I don't want to land there. If you go to page 6, now this is on the lines of standing up for injustice. There's a little comment there about bullying. Now, I just want to ask you a question. As I've lived in Australia now since 1995, I think it would be fair to say, in my mind, I've heard the rise and rise and rise of the question of bullying in school. And it seems as if it's an accepted thing. And on the one hand, you've got that going up and up and up. On the other hand, you've got the rise and rise of homeschooling, where some families they're responding by simply taking out their kids and schooling them themselves. I'm not talking about this year, I'm talking about in general. Whether there's a correlation, I have got no proof whatever. I'm just making bold assumptions. But when I've been the principal of schools, it's been absolutely weighing on my shoulders, that because the buck stops with the principal, that if there's any bullying going on, and if anybody is going to end up on the front page of the local paper about my school, then it's on my neck. Now, I would like to suggest to you that if you're a teacher in my school, it's on your neck. Because if you don't respond and get the matter under control, it's going to escalate to the principal, and that's not going to look good for the school or you. So what do you do? What is your attitude towards bullying in school, Heidi?
I think, having dealt with this fairly significantly last year, that it's often ignored. And a lot of kids will not come forward. They won't come forward to the correct person to tell. And if you tell, even though there's the rhetoric that, oh yes, you can tell anyone, and they can, if you don't tell the right person, if you tell the TA or you tell the gardener or all that, even though it's encouraged to talk to the person you trust, but if you're then stuck in as that person is very, like, you not believe, not considered that you actually understand what's going on. And a lot of kids will not tell a teacher or most people, even their parents, that bullying is happening. So I think there is a massive cover up. There is also I also have worked with the whole work with kids that can't tell the difference between bullying and no, they were actually having a joke. There's that too. But having been stuck attempting to report bullying and seeing it on, making sure I'd gone through what I knew of bullying, yep, it fits all these characteristics. Yes, it's like this. Yes, I've got my evidence. As I was only as a TA, I wasn't working as a teacher. Now I need to take it up the chain. Oh, no, you don't count. You're not. So I think there's a lot of, yes, I agree. You need to go and get it dealt with. Or you need to deal with it as far as you can yourself and then get it dealt with. But I think there is a bigger picture of how, what classifies as evidence? What do people need to hear from you so that you can actually get your point across?
Yeah.
What do the school children need to see in the school so that they're confident enough to come forward and say there's a problem?
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree. And where you're going, Heidi, can I take you to that second paragraph? When a bystander actually does object, it has been reported that 57% of occasions the bullying actually stops. So if the peers...
40% of it, that's a bit over half, that's great, but there's still 40% where it doesn't. 43% to be more precise.
If I might ask,
yes,
does that number talk specifically just about physical incidents or social bullying? Because
I think the whole Rigby is a really good bloke. I don't know Johnson, but Rigby is really, really good on classroom stuff. Right. I would think that's the whole gamut of bullying in general.
That would be, at least in my experience as a school student, that would be extremely hard to quantify, because what Heidi says is really correct, that we very rarely talk about any instances of bullying, and not just like physical incidents. We can even manage to keep those quiet. And I was one who was bullied myself. We can even keep those quiet. Stuff that happened to me, I would keep quiet, even if they were physical incidents. And the ones that are even less obvious than that, when it comes to just social ostracization, is that how you say it? And being outed by groups of people, and just people being an absolute D-head to you. It's that stuff is very rarely ever brought up. So yeah, it happens often.
What I'm saying is, you two are quite rightly talking about, getting the matters in the open and able to be discussed and acted upon. I'm particularly interested in you thinking about how you might, and taking up Michael's point earlier about what you do is seen by the young. Is there a way that you can engender amongst the rest of the class that any shape or form of bullying is not going to fly here? And while it's in your sphere of kids, you don't have to be the eyes. There should be others who can see, and just, as Michael says, have just the right word to say at the right time, and hopefully make it not the cool thing to do.
In that sense, yeah, totally. With me, I don't have specific details on policies and exact classroom interventions, but the general direction for me would be establishing a classroom that upholds Christianly biblical morality, one which is not just enforced by the teacher, but which is actually drilled into the students in a way that they'll start to assume it as something true and good, and thus anyone who even thinks of bullying would be convicted not to do so.
Sure. I mean, off the top of my head, I'm being slightly facetious here. It would be interesting to punish the bystander for standing by. I don't know whether any school policy has such a policy that they will get a detention or whatever if they stood by and did nothing. It would be fascinating to consider that.
Honestly, I think that I've actually never thought of that policy, but just from hearing it now, I actually really like it, because it's in the schoolyard where a lot of our ideas and a lot of our social norms are developed for the real world. And when we start to tolerate students who do not stand up or even talk about something that's happening in the schoolyard, and well, you can just guess what standard they're setting them for the real world, whether they'll actually talk about anything out there.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's a massive risk in standing up. There's a massive risk in speaking out for the child.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But as Christians, we need to be able to take that risk.
Yeah.
Yeah. But you're asking
self-sacrifice.
a kid to do it. You're not asking an adult to do it.
Yeah, that's right.
That is true. That is true, Heidi. That is putting a huge amount on a minor's shoulders.
That's right.
Yeah.
I think it's sometimes hard to recognise bullying too, because a child comes to you with a heightened response to an incident, and there's layers and layers and weeks of patterns formed that you can't respond to in an instant. You have to get to the bottom of it. And if you find that you're just opening the lid of something huge, my school does restorative practices, and I'll take that into whatever school I go, and it's basically using a circle where you have other staff members that are outside of the situation, and it becomes a circle of trust. And you often find the bullier crying, and they sort it out. And there's steps. The ultimate step is the circle with everyone involved, but going through person by person, individually, and then as a group. And often there's so much lying. And I had one principal last year or the year before, and the teacher went through all the footage of the camera footage to try and figure out if the boys were telling the truth.
Wow. Moving on, people. Can you go to page 8? And the story there is about Columbine High School, which I guess you all may have heard of.
Yep.
I see some hands.
All right.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not wanting to glorify evil. Don't get me wrong. I'm purposefully, though, asking you to consider the communities into which you will be going, either on placement or obviously when you get your full-time work. They are, they are so important, as you know, in community. The press love a high school shooting in America. It just is their bread and butter, and it goes all the way around the world. If you look at that list of the potential motivations, have a look at them: upbringing by parents, companies they keep, medications they're taking, movies they watch, the Judas factor, they were destined to do it, a choice made from within their hearts, their gender, boys are more prone to it than girls, peer pressure or a dare, taunting from perceived enemies at school. What drives 2 boys to go charging into their school, their community, to plan to kill hundreds of people or kids of their peers?
The heart is the most likely for me.
Sorry, who said that?
Shelley-Ann,
Okay.
the heart for me,
Why?
because in it is the seat of all emotion, and out of the heart flows actions. So it had to start in their heart, and all those other things are influences on them.
I have to agree with that. I think I agree with that in that ultimately a heart thing. I lump in, for the Columbine people, from what I've read about them at least, heart, I combine that with gender, being men, more prone to violence. It's a nature of the masculine sex. And Judas factor, honestly, I'll put a little bit into that, because if you read, there's actually a whole website dedicated to their materials from school, both recordings, assignments they've written, creative writing pieces they've sent in. And from that, you can see from years and years before the shooting, even, they had very, very violent mentalities and tendencies. So it was really like something that was just about to set off at some point. Many kids have that and never go for a shooting, but somehow it just ticked over and they decided to go for it.
And also, you can't hope to change, if you're their teacher, you can't hope to change their home life, the medications they're on, and the company they keep, but you can change their heart through God's grace.
I don't think you can change the heart.
God can.
That's pretty blanket. That's pretty
But
blanket.
you can hope. There's hope.
I don't disagree with the gender one, although I think that I think it is more acceptable for boys to be violent than for girls. But it was really interesting running a playgroup for a number of years, and the behaviour that was accepted, even this was under 0 to 5s, that was accepted from the 2 to 3 year old boys was not accepted from the 2 to 3 year old girls by most of the parents. And it was really interesting.
What kind of behaviour is this? I didn't hear that.
Hitting, taking things off others, pushing, being boisterous. It was excused as, oh, they're boys. Whereas if the girls did it, there was almost an immediate sanction of that's inappropriate behaviour. Like, it's not huge, and it wasn't a massive issue normally, but it was definitely observable in how they were being brought up.
Yeah, I
Can
would
I say
agree.
something?
Yeah, go for it.
I think that also, like, the way that the different observing in primary school classrooms, I'm working as a teacher's aide, and just seeing like the way that the girls express themselves versus the boys. I think that the way that boys express themselves is more violent in the physical way, whereas girls are more emotionally inclined in their sort of attacks at each other, if they attack at all. And so I think that in that sense, it does have a bit more of an impact, where a boy would be more inclined to physically attack.
Yeah. It makes sense why it's a bit more tolerated.
Heidi, I think you've touched on a very big point there, and that is how we as teachers treat the boys and the girls, and whether or not we close our minds subconsciously to a pushy-shovey type of behavior from boys, and we would never do that with a girl. I think it behoves us to be very conscious of gender inequality in school. It's so easy to fall into stereotypes. And personally, here's a confession from Jim. I can't really. I've been in Australia now since '95. I do feel like an immigrant. I'm sorry at times, but I've never really understood a game of rugby where males run after each other and grab them way above the waist, shoulders, arms, and do all manner of things. And it's seen as newsworthy, photo grab worthy. Whereas when I was at school, I was brought up to play rugby. And if ever I got hold of a student, another fella running above the waist, it was a foul and I was not allowed. We had to have a scrum. So here in Australia, it seems as if thuggery is the order of the day. And so I will never watch any game that has that.
That's just your British superiority complex
Excuse me.
talking.
No, not at all. I'm trying to stand up for gender equality. And I want you lot to do the same and don't turn a blind eye to thuggery. Okay? End of preach. Okay. Page 9. We're nearly through. This diagram on page 9, you can well disagree with, you can well get confused with, but I'm not saying you have to agree with it at all. I'm not sure I do. It's basically trying to draw a picture of, what we are as beings, and having in the center. And Shelley Ann, you were raising this earlier. It's the heart that is the trigger for that Columbine shooting. Well, if you go to the next slide and flick back and forth and go to 10, I do like the top 3. So to divide human life into heart, mind, body makes sense. I personally can't go so far as the heart, spirit, will, and then the mind, the body, the social, the soul. That's a bit too much for me, and it doesn't necessarily work. But what I would love to do with you, I would love you to reflect on the shape of a human being that's in your classroom. And I think there's an awful lot to be said on page 10 there, to go for the heart. Most secular education would simply look at the mind and what can you train the mind to do? What can you fill the mind with? And then they will idolize the body as being too fat, too thin, pretty or otherwise, as if that's, the be all and end all, and ignore the heart, where your motives, your drive, your reason for being. To me, the threefold thing of heart, body, and mind, to me, sums up who's sitting in my class and how I view them, and how I view them as different from a secular teacher would view them. So that's always in my mind. It's always in my heart that I go into my classroom. Yeah, there are spiritual beings, every single one of them. Comments? Other than Paul. I haven't heard from Tara. Come on. You've been quiet all morning.
What's this, censorship?
Yes, I know, Paul. You've had your go. Unmute yourself, Tara. What do you think about this? How do we exist as 3, or do we? What do you think about yourself?
Like in terms of the. Wait, what do you mean?
Do you think of yourself as heart center, mind next, body's last? How do you view yourself?
Well, I'd like to think so, obviously, but I think it kind of depends on certain things. But yeah, obviously I'd want my heart to be
Right, okay. Thank you, Tara.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking, I think more often than not, my failings start when I put feelings at the top. The feelings dominate and drown everything else. If I get hurt or if I get proud, and I'm just overthinking, overanalyzing, and basically paralyzing, because I might be driven by feelings. And I wonder how many of our kids in classrooms are driven by their feelings.
All of them.
Heidi, you're breaking out there. Explain.
I've been working in high schools for the last 6 years, and a little bit of primary school, a lot of high schools, and particularly year 8. And I'm just picturing the year 8s in the last that I've worked with, they're now year 9s, but I'd had them for 2 years at this point. And I'd say all of them are driven by how they feel about, almost all of them. You have the 1 or 2 kids who can rationally logic through something. And you have all the kids that don't have the emotional vocab to go with it. But schools are a pent-up lot of feelingness that they have to walk through.
This is true.
I think that's why we're called to renew our minds, because, you know, our thoughts and our feelings and all the things that go through our head, they can control us, which is why we've been called to daily renew our minds, and we have to come back to the truth and be grounded in the truth. And we need to teach our kids how to do that, because our feelings, I mean, they will go up and down, and that can all be before breakfast. But if we're able to discipline ourselves to go, okay, those are my feelings, but that's separate from the truth and what I know within my heart and within my spirit, and distinguish the two, then we'll be on the path to be able to live out the freedom that Christ purchased for us. So I think it's about teaching our kids how to distinguish between what I feel and what is the actual truth. Because often they can be completely different things.
Excellent. Okay, it's 10. Any final comments, questions about anything, folks? And shall we meet again? Yes, Luke, I see that hand. Shall we meet again tomorrow at 9? Is that okay?
Easy.
For those who can make it. If not, then catch the recording. Luke.
Yeah, it's interesting that we're talking about like the heart and the mind, because I've been listening to a book called You Are What You Love by James K.A. Smith, and he's talking about how primarily the thought in our society is that we are thinking people. We think, and that's the way that we live, but that's our idea, but in reality, most of the time we actually act out of our heart. And he's making the argument that actually what we should be focusing on is not to try and think our way into Christ-likeness, but it's more to actually have Jesus, you know, invade our heart and become someone that we love, so that when we, out of our love for him, that's changes the way that we act, rather than us, like he mentions in the start of the book. I'm only just starting it, so I might have more revelations, but he's talking about how if we have things that we know but we don't actually act on it, why is that? If we know it in our heads, it's like, okay, well, why haven't you done it yet? But if that argument that we actually act out of our heart is true, then there's a totally different understanding that we have to build on. Okay, well, how do we teach someone if we're reaching the heart rather than the mind?
Very good, Luke.
Yeah.
Can you put a reference to that book on the news forum?
Yeah.
And I suggest that you may well find that a very useful reference for some of your assignments.
Yeah, definitely.
It sounds to me that's hitting the nail on the head. That's great. Any other final comments today, folks?
Just out of the theology unit that I've been doing, would add in scripture meditation and the impact that the Word of God has on our hearts would be vital. So you have to include that in your thinking, I think.
Yeah, that's the key. That's the key one right there. We can't just say what our heart thinks is good, because even the scriptures themselves say the heart above all things is deceitful. Yeah. So that root in all our lives and all of our classroom stuff has to be the Word of God. We have to have it right there with us whenever we need it.
Yeah. Excellent. Going. So, Luke, can you pray us out today? Unmute us.
Sure can.
Thank you.
Sure can. Lord, thank you for today. Thank you that you've given us the opportunity to just learn how to reflect and become people who teach your children your truths, Lord. And God, I pray that as we step closer and closer to this journey as teachers, God, I pray that you would just lead our hearts and just lead us in a way that we can become the best teachers that we can be, so that you can be glorified, Lord. And I ask this in your name. Amen.
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 Till tomorrow, folks.
Thanks.
Thanks, Jim.
Catch you, Jim.
Thank you, Jim.
See you, everyone.